Hi there, I'm Mark and welcome to Book Ramble. I'm going to be talking about this wee little book, Don Quixote. There's a lot of stuff in there. I hope to finish it. When I first came across this book, late 80s, early 90s, I am convinced it was in two big books. They managed to cram it into this little thing because the pages are quite thin, and some would say the text is dense. Certainly what is included is deep, deeper than I remembered, deeper than I imagined. I could do a whole episode, perhaps I should, on how we think we know a book because it's famous, like 1984 or Animal Farm. But when you come to read it and when you come to study it, you don't know much. And I know that, and again, I'm an atheist, but I have studied scripture and the ancient rabbis who had this saying that you can never get to the end of God. It's not the questions that you give, it's the questions that you offer. It's the same with any book, and this just poses so many questions. So to set up what I'm doing or how I'm approaching this, I thought I had notes in here to do with anything, and I'm noticing it just says make rice pudding. It's got nothing to do with Don Quixote, but here's my notes. First of all, the author. Cervantes was a prisoner in, or certainly the Corsairs of Algeria, I believe. So what is now modern Morocco and Algeria, the Maghreb, was once really broken up into various kingdoms. The one I tend to know more about is around the Salé area, the Salé pirates. There used to be a Portuguese port called Mazagan, which was like the way in which Western nations kept an eye on the pirates. But they would take a lot of people from sea and land. And Cervantes ended up being a prisoner for quite a few years, but he got his release. And he would have gone back to his natal country, Spain, and then write Don Quixote. I don't think it was the only thing he wrote, but Don Quixote. So when you read it, you think it's about this tall, thin, ascetic-looking man who's plainly struggling with mental acuity at times. And in a modern sense, you could argue that it is a study in mental illness. I'm on the fence on that one. I'm not sure I would classify it as mental illness. He certainly has bouts of idiocy. And it's because, and according to the book, he's deluded. It's delusion. Page 6 in this one, it could be different pages in other versions. He thought it now a crime to deny himself any longer to the injured world that wanted such a deliverer. The more when he considered what grievances he was to redress, what wrongs and injuries to remove, what abuses to correct, and what duties to discharge. And I think the thumbnail of this particular study is going to be dreadful grace and assurance, because that's him to a T, Don Quixote. He is absolutely convinced he's needed, and he should go out into the world and save people, mainly women. And he, in his own mind, he sets up this woman who is not the fair Dulcinea, but he's got this template of a maiden who needs him to go out and prove himself. And it's all because he's been reading book after book after book of old-style chivalric romance, which were very common, very popular in, well, more than 100 years before the time of this, but no doubt was still knocking around and people liked reading. So Don Quixote as a character, I'm not sure he would be considered to be put away today, or even then, but he's certainly got this this such resolute belief in what he must do. Nothing's going to get in his way, even to his own cost. So he's well-meaning, is insistent, is naive, and is annoying. He's very annoying. He's got this world in which he goes around, which is still almost medieval. We come across goat herds and we come across itinerant traders and so on. So it's a very interesting book, and if you just see it as going from one escapade to another, often amusing. And in the Spanish-speaking world, highly popular and influential to this day. I'm reading an English version, so much will be lost. And I don't get the full sensibilities of the Spanish mind now or then. But it still has important themes to discuss. And I wonder, on that note, is whether in the English mind we kind of formalise it too much. Rather than just enjoying the read, we want to find out themes and points of motivation. Perhaps it's not necessary. So, Don Quixote, we find him to be blankly optimistic, full of assured... Well, I don't know what is the word. He's got surety. He knows what he thinks the world should be, and he's going to do it. He's often, though, very trusting, far too trusting at times for other people. And in a way, he's like a dull moral compass. He's one of these people that believe the answer to be this, and there's no way it's going to change. And he's also Miguel Cervantes. In fact, his name isn't really that, is it? Hang on. Let's do this gentleman justice now. Miguel de... And again, if it was in the proper Spanish, the Castilian Spanish, it would be Cervantes Saavedra, I think. But now, I think in American Spanish, it would be Miguel de Cervantes Saavedra. And if I butchered both of them, I do apologise. I probably have. He has a companion who's the exact opposite. So Don Quixote is tall and slim and ascetic. And then we come across his companion, who's not in the first chapter, I don't think. He comes along and he is fat, small and cynical and swarthy. That's Sancho Panza. So they're chalk and cheese. They're like Aubrey and Maturin in Master and Commander. So I'm going to go through the notes I've made in the book and to one side. They ain't going to be in any order. We find out he's nigh 50 years of age. He's a young strapling. This is Don Quixote, lean-bodied and thin-faced. And Quijada, in, I think it's Castilian Spanish, means that is lantern jaws. And this is apt. He passed his time in reading books. His problem, he read so many of them, he came to believe they were true. That the world really was so-and-so, and it needs knights to go out and save damsels in distress. He grew so strangely enamoured of these amusements that he sold many acres of land to purchase books of that kind. I can appreciate why. And then Saavedra, Cervantes, he then makes two, I think, very early on important stabs as a critique of literature. I think this is one of the reasons this book exists. He said, these books, these love addresses, many of them had an extraordinary style. And he talks about this use of language, which is just apt for the time, but even he is chortling at it. He says, he gives an example, it's in quotation marks, of a kind of sentence that books used to have. The reason of your unreasonable usage of my reason does so enfeeble my reason that I have reason to expostulate with your beauty. Having said that, I now realise I talked about that when I was mentioning why I make notes of Don Quixote. And I think I said then, I'm going to repeat this. So if you saw the book notes video, you probably think, hang on, and you mentioned this before. Yes, I have. And then he says another critique. By sleeping little and reading much, he at last lost his reason. A world of extraordinary notions picked out of his books crowded into his imagination, insomuch that all the fables and fantastical tales which he read seemed to him now as true as the most authentic histories. In the 1980s, when I was in the Navy, a guy I used to serve with on one ship, HMS Charybdis, used to get sent by his wife videotapes of a soap opera on British TV called EastEnders. And because we were bereft of TV, anything that came through the post was eagerly received, and if it could be shared with your mates. So down the mess deck, we would sit there and watch EastEnders. And these characters became central to those who watched them. It was like a connection back to the homeland. We was out in the Indian Ocean, out in the Gulf, and then you got these Cockneys talking like that, and they're all like doing each over, and they're all having these petty dramas. And then sometime in the 1990s, I became aware of a group of people, and I think it even made the news in the UK. And it was this kind of phenomenon that was starting to be talked about, how actors and actresses who played them different characters in soap dramas were finding it more and more increasingly difficult to go out and about in the streets because people would recognise them and go up talking to them as though they were those people in the dramas. One woman, I think she was from Emmerdale Farm, which is another long-running British soap, if it's still going, had a woman accost her because in the soap, her character had done something disreputable. And this woman came up to her in the streets and started arguing. How dare you do that? How dare you treat them? As though that they were those people. And it's this thing, isn't it, that as you're reading a book, they become so invested in ourselves, perhaps. Some people find it difficult to differentiate the fact that they're made up. And they think it's real. And that seems to be what Cervantes is saying about Don Quixote. There's been a whole history, whole plethora, wonderful word, of books, but he's come to believe it's all real. And therefore his world becomes a mixture. He can't differentiate between what is the reality of his world, but the reality he thinks it should be, because in his head, he has literally gone so deep into the ink that the world has become a page turner. And if that doesn't make sense, I apologise. Thus confused, he unluckily stumbled upon the oddest fancy that ever entered into a madman's brain, to turn knight-errant and roam through the whole world in quest of adventures, imitating those knights-errant of whom he had read. And it's all to do getting everlasting honour. And that's what we get. Whether it's the same throughout the whole of the book, I can't remember. I'll have to report back on that later. When we get to chapter 2, we're introduced to the first of a couple of Sallys. And now Sally is, if you ever had in the era that we're talking about, 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th centuries, probably before then as well, back as far as ancient Rome really, certainly up until modern warfare, that one technique was to get an army inside a city, then surround it and make a siege, and then try and starve them out to capitulate, because the walls were so well built generally, it was almost impossible to scale them or get in. So you had to bombard them, make life miserable, and then hope hunger would force them to surrender. But occasionally, the army inside would rush out to try and attack the besieging army, and that was known as a sally. And it's interesting use of that word because chapter 2 is the first sally that Don Quixote has going out into the world, and there's another one as well that follows up soon afterwards. And he goes out into the world. And the reason being because we read that according to Don Quixote, in an inward thinking, he said he thinks it now a crime to deny himself any longer to the injured world that wanted such a deliverer. He resolved to be dubbed a knight by the first he should meet, who, as the romances informed him, had formerly done the like. And then he goes out and has an adventure. And then I think I came across this little wry part on page 7. And this is Don Quixote speaking. "O happy age, O fortunate times," cried he, "decreed to usher into the world my famous achievements, achievements worthy to be engraven on brass, carved on marble, and delineated in some masterpiece of painting, as monuments of my glory, and examples for posterity." It was at that point I began to suspect personally as the reader that there's more to this than just the story of Don Quixote. This is Cervantes poking fun or holding up a mirror to the then Western world, or certainly the Spanish world, and then getting us to question what we come across. These, paintings of old, or the statues, and of course, hasn't that been in the news in the last 5 to 10 years? Why are they there? What are they trying to portray? And who are they portraying, and for what reason? And it seems that Cervantes is doing something similar. And he has his adventures, and he goes to an inn, and he imagines it's a castle, and he ends up attacking half the people, and it's quite amusing. And nobody can stop him because he hasn't got Sancho Panza at this time to bring him back down. And he is a chaos agent. Don Quixote goes around, and in his mind, he's reenacting the life that has been talked about in the past through books, paintings, statues, and he tries to replicate that, and of course it's no longer that world. There's also, I came across on page 13, which I took to be almost like a link to modern fantasy. It's quite a long quotation I'm going to read out here, and I just need to make sure, when was this written? It was originally published in 2 parts, in 1605 and 1615, so there were 2 books. And it's this bit here. I'll read it, the notes I've made, and then ask yourself, because I certainly think this is what fantasy novels are now based on. He says, "For admit the histories are silent in this matter, the authors thinking it needless to mention things so evidently necessary as money and clean shirts. Yet there is no reason to believe the knights went without either. And you may rest assured that all the knight-errant had their purses well lined to supply themselves with necessaries, shirts, salves, for they had not the conveniency of surgeons to cure them every time they fought in fields and deserts, unless some sage or magician, some damsel or dwarf, should have a small bottle of such greater virtue that they no sooner tasted a drop of it, but their wounds were as perfectly cured as if they had never received any." They're like magic potions, health potions that you get on online games, like World of Warcraft, Baldur's Gate 3, for instance. You can have stuff that brings back your health. You can even create them. Well, that's the basis of modern fantasy, and it's more than 3 centuries old. So nothing new under the sun. When we get to page 27, chapter 4, "What befell the knight after he had left the inn?" There's this scene, very powerful scene, where he gets back home, and the people who know him realise that the reason he's gone off and he's becoming a chaos agent is because he's been reading these books. And therefore, to help them, they block up the entrance to where the books are kept, hoping to confuse him that, "Oh, I thought the entrance was there, was I imagining it?" And then they try to get rid of the books. So that, before it was too late, actually the word is ere it was too late, they burned all these excommunicated books, many of them that deserve as much to be burned as those of the rankest heretics. Said the curate, "I am of your mind, and verily tomorrow shall not pass over before I have fairly brought them to a trial, and condemn them to the flames, that they may not minister occasion to such a world as would read them to be perverted after the example of my good friend." It's burning of books. Now, Cervantes lived in a world in which that had happened. Possibly still was with the auto de fe. The auto de fe, historically, took him harder, you won't tuck him out of anything. Auto de fe, the burning of a heretic. It's part of the Spanish Inquisition. And that did not disappear until the 19th century in Spain. So Cervantes must have been putting up a mirror and making a bold statement, as it turned out, about this practice of burning books. And it has this scene where a priest and a curate, they're deciding which books to toss into the fire. And one happens to be written by someone knows, oh, we'll keep that there then. But the rest, they can go. They're useless. Very interesting, over 2 or 3 pages. So, for instance, here, they're picking up books, and imagine the scene. Someone's looking at it and going, yeah, this. Now, my Lord Florismart is here, for his rough, dull, and insipid style deserves no better usage. And they throw him into the fire. The holy title, cried the curate, might in some measure atone for the badness of the book, The Knight of the Cross. But then, as the saying is, the devil lurks behind the cross. To the flames with him. And you got this very interesting scene. It doesn't involve Don Quixote, of others who are throwing books into oblivion to get rid of temptation or the heresy that's in them. That has got to be a political message that is outside of the story, although it is linked to the story of Don Quixote, because they're saying it's these books that have caused this madness. Very powerful. And a warning. It's this danger of books and the desire to burn them. And it goes on for page after page. I've got down here 29, 30 and 31. There's also this interjection by the author himself into the story. It's chapter 9, wherein is concluded the stupendous battle between the vigorous Biscayan and the valiant Manchegan. And he said, he almost leaves it where the man is fighting Don Quixote and he's raised his sword and it's almost like a freeze frame. And then it cuts away to the voice of the author. And then it comes back almost half a chapter later where the man is still about to hit Don Quixote over the head, and then it carries on. Unique, wonderful. It's like a cinema being paused, a film being paused. So you get this, what I'm doing now, a pause in the action, and then it continues. Amazing. I very rarely come across an old book that does that. So the style is unique and also very innovative in the way it's written. And the author talks about trying to find more writings based on what we've covered so far in the story. 44 pages at this point. So by 46, he says, the labour and pains I have taken to discover the end of this delectable history. As I was walking one day on the exchange of Toledo, an old paper was found, written in Arabic. Some Moorish sage he paid for to translate the bundles of papers and found that it contained the whole history of Don Quixote. So 40 odd pages inwards, it's paused. The author, Miguel Cervantes Saavedra, then says, oh, it suddenly ended here, so I went out and looked for more papers, found them in a foreign language, Arabic, got it translated, and now I can continue the story, and then the story carries on. A very interesting interlude. I'm also hoping that we come across the windmills more, because I've come across them very early in the story, but hardly anything happens. The tilting at windmills scene, but perhaps it comes again later. So I haven't got far. I've actually got up to about page 64. 63 says the following. It's talking about, and again, we get these interludes, so it turns out that Don Quixote, and now with Sancho Panza, they're going through the countryside. I think he's on his second sale at this point. And he meets some goat herders who sit down, give him wine and food, and talk at the tale of a woman who is the most beautiful woman in the area, who's given up everything to become a goat herder herself, and one man tries to woo her. He talks about he not only loved but worshipped her. In this way, Marcella does more harm in this country than the plague would do. For her courteousness and fair looks draw on everybody to love her. but then her reserve and disdain break their hearts, and all they can do, poor wretches, is to make a heavy complaint and call her cruel, unkind, ungrateful, and a world of such names whereby they plainly show what a sad condition they are in. This is the man, the writer, giving a tale of how men blame the women for looking good and they want them. And because the women turn around and say no, they blame the women, not themselves. That's quite unusual for a male writer to write such, well, certainly in my opinion and mind at that time. It's very... I wonder if that's what makes it great. That Cervantes is one of those authors that can lift themselves out of their time and poke fun at the way fellow men behave, in this case Don Quixote and Sancho Panza, being quite cynical, and then men lusting after women. The whole point of becoming a knight-errant is to impress women, and then making themselves look foolish. Now, I never picked that up before when I read Don Quixote many years ago. So again, and I keep talking about this, either I'm late and stupid and it's taken a while to get my head around this, and it's only now that I'm getting it, or I was typical male, too young to take on that message. Certainly with these books. And that's not to say an 18-year-old couldn't get it. I didn't get it. That's what I'm saying. I'm probably various stages of my life. Certain books were just way over my head. But it's great in that regards. As I said, and I think I said this earlier, if it was just Don Quixote continually going through these madcap scenes, it would get boring very quickly. I think that was my problem when I first read it. What I'm now picking up, it's not that. Each scene is definitely bringing to point some criticism or a slight jab at the way things were being done in the society of Cervantes at the time. And you could say, well, that's just Spain of the 1600s. No, I think that could be said now in any society. Perhaps that's why these books resonate even now with people. They're telling truths that haven't gone away. Perhaps it's always been that way. I don't think you get men now going out trying to be knight-errants, but they may be substituting something else, and so on. And of course there will be the female versions, definitely written, doing exactly the same but using a female protagonist or main character. And that's, I wasn't going to talk about this, it's just come to my mind, and I don't know whether it's justifiable enough to say so, but I think the main character here is Spain. It's not Don Quixote. This is about Spanish society. That's the main character. How people react, how they're burning books to save people, how people are lusting for women, but then when it's not returned, do things, and so on and so on. That, I think, that's just twigged in my mind. I have to think about that. I'm not sure if I would say that later on down the line. But right now, I'm thinking that may be the point, as well as holding up a mirror. The main character here is the Spanish. And by extension now, us. So, anyway, it's a great start. I'm really enjoying it, but it's going to take a while to get through, especially with all the others that I'm including. So, there you go. Don Quixote. If you have got this far, well, great. You're going to do well for my retention analytics, if that means anything. Thank you. But please leave a comment, and if you haven't subscribed, do so. Until we meet again, ta-ta for now.